Hi and welcome back, Flight Path Pioneers. Helicopter lesson in 15 minutes. We're going to leave components, go to the next section called Basic Aerodynamics. And trust me, there's lots to be learned here. We're going to stick to the basics in this next lesson. We're going to break it up in 4 components. We're going to start off by talking about the airfoils. Then we'll move on to the 4 forces and the lift equation. And then we'll talk about the rotor system and vibrations. Again, my goal is to be able to talk about this from a very practical manner. I'm a CFII helicopter. I'm also an airplane pilot. Trying to get to my CFII by the summer sometime. Recording these lessons are really for 2 reasons. 2 reasons. A, I like to give back. But number 2 reason, which is really the most important one, is to continue to teach this so I too become better at both presenting and absorbing and understanding the information by telling stories around this. And I would encourage you to do the same thing, especially for the adult learners. We learn much better by doing, feeling, and touching things. All right, with that said, let's go dive into the airfoils itself. So the airfoil, essentially speaking, is talking about a wing. A wing of an aircraft, like an airplane, or a rotor on a helicopter are very similar in nature. Of course, one is fixed on the fuselage, facing forward, so the airplane needs to move forward by thrust in order to generate enough air coming over and under the wing in order to be able to increase the angle of attack and create lift itself. The uniqueness of the helicopter, and that's why we probably all love it, is that we do not need to move forward in order to create lift. We have a rotor that spins, and by pulling collective, by increasing the angle of attack, we can create lift. But how does it really all work? So let's dive into it and get really the understanding of the basics first, and then again later on we're going to talk about how that applies in an aircraft when flying and all of the other things that come into play. We're going to leave that out for this point in time. So the airfoil is any surface such as an airplane wing or rotor blade designed to create useful reaction through the air, which is moving in to create lift. Simple as that. Now, interesting enough, if you go outside to the helicopter and you very carefully inspect the rotor blades all the way at the end of the tips, you can see if they are symmetrical or asymmetrical. And that is something that you will certainly be tested on, and you should embed in your presentation that you have a symmetrical on the main rotor, asymmetrical on the tail rotor, but also try to understand why that is. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the advanced portion of the aerodynamics, but I want you to think about that, right? A symmetrical is an airfoil that has the exact same shape on the top and the bottom. So if it is sitting in a neutral position, the air is going over top of it at the same speed. The molecules that need to go over top and on the bottom are going at the same speed. Therefore, not making any changes in the pressure above or below. It's exactly the same. Once we, at the angle of attack, we change that, we start creating a high pressure on the bottom and a low pressure on the top, which will help you create lift. More on that in another section. The asymmetrical tail rotor, again, go to the tail rotor, take a very close look at it. We talked a little bit about that in components, that the tail rotor is offset by a degree. And that is only, we need this because as soon as the main rotor blades start spinning counterclockwise in a neutral position, so they're not generating any lift, well, Newton says that everything has an equal and opposite direction, so the nose wants to start pulling to the right. So we already, as soon as the blades are turning, we want to have a little bit of pressure, torque put into it, so we keep the nose, center line, and that is something that we need to take into account. So the best thing that I can recommend is that you stand back when somebody else is flying. From startup, right, start taking a look at how things are functioning, mechanically speaking, and then as they go to the transition of spinning up to rotation, in other words, wanting to lift off, see what takes place. Now, you can't really look at the blade close up enough, obviously for obvious reasons, but you can listen to it, you can hear the difference, right? That helps you understand it better and be able to tell a story around that when somebody is asking you about the airfoil and symmetrical and asymmetrical tail rotor and main rotor system. So with that said, we're going to go into the components of the airfoil itself, which is important to understand because we should start talking about more advanced aerodynamics and what is actually taking place. It's important to understand the components. So the leading edge of the rotor blade, again, go to the rotor blade, take a look at it. In the helicopter is stainless steel. And why is that? Well, it is reinforced, right? That's where all of the wind, the particles, the rain, the ice, whatever else you're going to be flying through is going to be hitting. So it needs to be reinforced, right? And otherwise you're going to have a very short life of a rotor blade. As it is today, they have a 12-year required replacement for good reasons. And it's part of the reason that you want to do a daily inspection before flying to make sure there's no damage done to the leading edge or any part of the airfoil itself, right? So it's your responsibility as you go out to take a look at that. So the leading edge is the thicker edge, and then the trailing edge is direct opposite, is the thinnest part of the airfoil itself. Now you have to draw an imaginary line, which is called a short line, between the leading edge and the trailing edge, right through the center itself. If this is horizontal and you have symmetrical system above and below it, you're not generating any lift. It is once you start tipping that when things change, of course. So the center of pressure is the point where the resultant aerodynamic forces will act on the airfoil, intersects the short line itself. It sounds complicated. We're going to make sense out of that later on. The blade span is the total distance between the hub, right, by the rotor head, all the way to the blade tip. So the next one then would be the tip path plane, which is if you stand back and you look at a full rotation, and it's kind of cool when they do it at night. Sometimes there's lights that you can really visualize that. It's a circular plane made by the rotational path of the blades as they make a full cycle of rotation itself. Now the plane of rotation will tilt as the rotor disc tilts perpendicular to the axis of rotation itself. So the plane, if you are level, if you tilt it forward, of course the distance to the ground is different than if you are in a horizontal position itself. It also will pull you forward, right? The thrust component will change at that point in time. The axis, and that's a nice thing about the rotor blade system, you can go left, right, forward, and backwards. You have that those forces can be applied if you want to go left, you want to go right, you want to go forward, you want to go backwards, right? All these things have to be taken into consideration and think about what are the forces that are enacting, but also what happens once the air passes through the blade itself, that it goes backwards and downwards, and how that can impact the characteristics of flight itself. The induced flow, just as I just mentioned, is the air coming from the top through the rotor system itself, is downward, right? If you go to an auto rotation, for example, it is upward, but in a normal flight, it is downward air. And there's some really good YouTube videos you can see when people are, when they're spraying water, and how it chops the air up, right? And it is downward and backwards. And it's something that, when you see this, it's probably better than just to listen to it. So on a foggy day, or you don't want to fly on a foggy day, I suppose, but you can set that, maybe even if you have a smoke, as an example. Again, YouTube clips are readily available to be able to visualize that for yourself, to really help you understand how it all works. The pitch angle is the angle between the short line and the tip path plane. Collective raises a higher angle of attack, right? The angle of attack is the angle between the short line and the resultant, right? Increase the angle of attack, increases in lift. But also have to be mindful of the critical angle of attack, which is the maximum angle of attack of the airfoil can reach before clean airflow over it is disturbed and lift can be destroyed. And that is something that you have to think about if the molecules come across, right, in a symmetrical and a horizontal neutral position, they're running across and meet up in the back end. As you increase the angle of attack, the ones on top need to run faster, right? So low pressure versus high pressure, which can give you lift. But at some point in time, you can get to an angle of attack that is too high. So when you are running, if the molecules come across, even the ones on the bottom ones are still being pushed in and downward. The ones on top get loose. And when that get loose, you get this disturbed air, which then you lose lift, which becomes problematic very, very quickly. All right, that's it for this particular session. We'll see you at the next session. We're going to talk about the lift components.